Snow fell thick over Chicago, muffling the city's Christmas Eve hum into something softer, lonelier. Inside Giovanni's restaurant, most tables had emptied couples drifting home to trees and children and the warm promise of morning. But one table remained set, two wine glasses catching candlelight napkins folded like promises no one intended to keep. Victoria Hayes sat alone in the glow of that single flickering flame, her phone screen casting pale light across her face. The message was short, brutal in its efficiency. Derek Walsh Stanford, MBA, Goldman Sachs, VP, the man her best friend Amanda had called perfect for you, Vic. He wasn't coming. Family emergency in Boston. Had to fly out. Rain check. She didn't reply. Just set the phone face down on white linen and reached for her wine glass. Third of the evening. The Barolo tasted like expensive regret. 10 years. 10 Christmas Eves since her father died in a hospital bed, while she sat in a conference room, phone buzzing with calls she didn't answer because the Meridian pitch couldn't wait. 10 years of spending this night alone, punishing herself in ways her mother never had to, because Victoria did it better than anyone else could. The server approached sympathy in her professional smile. Your guest isn't coming. Victoria smiled back, the kind of smile you wear when disappointment stops surprising you. Doesn't look like it. Should I clear the extra setting? Something stubborn flared in Victoria's chest. Not yet. The server nodded and retreated. Victoria checked her phone again. 47 unread emails, all from her VP James, about tomorrow's board meeting, all marked urgent. She opened the first one, then the second, her thumb scrolling through projected revenue and risk assessments, and everything that should have made her feel victorious after today's $50 million Meridian close. Instead, she felt nothing, just the familiar hollow where something essential used to live. The door swung open. Snow gusted in with the cold, and a man in a worn peacoat stepped inside, stamping his boots on the mat. He looked around the restaurant with the uncertain air of someone who didn't belong in places with chandeliers and prix-fixe menus. His coat was old but clean. When he pulled off a knit cap, his dark hair stood at angles that suggested he'd been working, not primping. Victoria watched him speak to the hostess, saw the woman check her tablet gesture toward the back toward her section of the restaurant. The man walked slowly, shoulders tight with discomfort. He wove between tables full of couples who belonged here, who knew which fork to use and how to pronounce Chateau Neuf du Pape. His eyes scanned the remaining occupied tables and landed on Victoria. Something in his face shifted. Relief, maybe? Or resignation. He crossed the final distance and slid into the seat across from her. I'm so sorry I'm late. The bus broke down on Ashland and I had to walk the last 6 blocks. Victoria blinked. This wasn't Derek. Derek drove a Lexus and wore Armani suits and had never taken a Chicago public bus in his life. This man's coat had a patch on the elbow. His boots were scarred from real use, and his hands resting now on the table were rough with calluses, the hands of someone who worked with them every day. But those eyes, kind eyes, honest in a way that made her chest constrict. It's okay. I was starting to think no one was coming. The lie came easily. Let him think she'd been waiting for him. Let this mistake, whatever it was, play out for just a few more minutes before the loneliness came crashing back. I'm here now. He offered a tentative smile. I'm glad you waited. The server materialized with menus, and the man she still didn't know his name took his with an expression that suggested he was calculating whether he could afford anything on the list. Victoria recognized that look. Her father had worn it every time her mother dragged them to restaurants nicer than their budget allowed. Across town earlier that evening, Marcus Reed had finished mopping the last hallway of Lincoln Community Center, his shoulders aching from a double shift. He was 35, but felt 50. Each year of single fatherhood etched into his spine, his knees the permanent furrow between his eyebrows. In the maintenance closet that smelled of bleach and floor wax, he'd peeled off his work gloves and checked his phone. One message from Mrs. Chen confirming she'd picked Sophie up from after-school care. One message from his Match.com connection. Rachel, elementary school teacher, seemed nice in her profile, confirming their 8 o'clock reservation at Giovanni's. And one handmade card tucked in his coat pocket, glitter already shedding onto the fabric. Ray Patterson found him staring at his reflection in the small mirror hung above the utility sink. Ray was 58, had worked maintenance at the center for 30 years, and possessed the kind of steady wisdom that came from watching life unfold without trying to force it into shape. Big date tonight. Marcus tried to smile. Something like that. You look terrified. That obvious Ray leaned against the doorframe, his own shift finished, heading home to a wife and dinner, and the comfortable routine of a life well built. You know what your problem is, Marcus. You think you're not good enough. Been thinking it so long you've made it true in your own head. Marcus turned away from the mirror. I'm a 35-year-old janitor with a 7-year-old daughter. I'm not exactly a catch, Ray. You're a man who shows up every day, works 2 jobs so his kid can have new shoes and hot meals, and a father who's present. That's worth more than all the fancy degrees those downtown types have. Try telling that to a woman on a first date. Ray pushed off the doorframe. Any woman worth having will see it, and any woman who doesn't isn't worth your time. But doubt had roots deeper than Ray's encouragement could reach. Marcus had been raised by a father who worked construction, a man who measured his worth in hours clocked and bills paid, and never once complained about the unfairness of a system that rewarded credentials over character. Marcus had inherited that work ethic, that quiet dignity, but also the bone-deep belief that men like him, men who cleaned other people's offices and fixed other people's problems, were invisible in the ways that mattered. Still, he'd made a promise to Sophie. And Marcus Reed didn't break promises to his daughter. At home, in their small 2-bedroom apartment on the south side, Sophie had ambushed him the moment he walked through the door. She was 7, all wild curls and gap-toothed grin, wearing the Christmas sweater her second-grade teacher had given her, because Mrs. Ramirez knew money was tight, and Sophie had admired it out loud once too often. Daddy, you have to really go tonight. You promised. Marcus scooped her up, breathing in the scent of strawberry shampoo and the vanilla cookies Mrs. Chen had let her help bake. I'm going, sweetheart. I'm going right now. And you have to be nice and smile and tell her she's pretty. Marcus set her down, kneeling, so they were eye to eye. How about I just be myself? Sophie's face scrunched in concentration. Okay, but take the card I made you for good luck. She'd pressed it into his hands that morning over Cheerios, and he'd read it twice before the words fully registered. Daddy, don't be lonely this Christmas. Below that, in her careful block letters, love Sophie, with a heart that listed to one side like the Christmas trees she'd drawn all over the construction paper, each one shedding glitter like snow. Now standing outside Mrs. Chen's door at 7:30, Sophie hugged him hard enough to steal his breath. You have to really, really go, Daddy. Promise. I promise, sweetheart. I'm going now. And Mrs. Chen, who'd watched Sophie since Marcus's ex-wife Jennifer walked out 6 years ago, touched his arm with gentle understanding. Go. Have a nice evening. You deserve something good. But Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that men like him didn't get nice evenings at restaurants with white tablecloths. They got by. They survived. They worked and sacrificed and tried to be good fathers. And that had to be enough, because hoping for more only led to disappointment. The bus breaking down felt like confirmation. Of course it did. Of course he'd arrived 20 minutes late, sweating, despite the cold, his coat dusted with snow, and his boots leaving wet prints on Giovanni's pristine floor. Of course the hostess would look at him with that professional mask that couldn't quite hide her assessment. This man doesn't belong here. But she gestured to the back, and he'd walked toward what he thought was his table. And when he saw the woman sitting alone, relief had flooded through him. She'd waited. Despite his lateness, despite everything, she'd waited. At the table now, Marcus fumbled with the menu prices jumping out at him like accusations. $38 for pasta, $42 for chicken. The most expensive meal he'd bought in the last year had been Sophie's birthday dinner at the diner down the street. Burgers and milkshakes and the chocolate cake they'd shared because ordering 2 desserts felt excessive. "You okay?" Victoria's voice pulled him back. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't read. "Yeah. Sorry. Long day." She nodded, and something in her face softened. "Me too. What do you do?" The question felt safer than admitting he couldn't afford anything on this menu. "Management. Business consulting." She waved a hand as if dismissing the details. "Boring mostly. Lots of meetings and reports." "What about you?" The moment of truth. The moment where he could lie, could pretend to be someone who belonged in a place like this. But Marcus Reed had never been good at lying. And he wouldn't start now. "Maintenance work, custodial mostly. I do nights at the community center and weekends at an office building downtown." He watched for the flicker of disappointment, the subtle withdrawal that always came when women learned what he did. But Victoria just nodded. "That's honest work. Doesn't pay much." The words slipped out before he could stop them, defensive, waiting for her judgment. Victoria met his eyes. "My father was a plumber, worked 60-hour weeks to put me through college. He never complained, never acted like his work was beneath him." Something in Marcus's chest loosened. "What happened to Tim?" "He died 10 years ago tonight. Heart attack. I was in a meeting when he called." She lifted her wine glass, studied the deep red liquid. I didn't answer. By the time I got to the hospital, he was gone. The raw honesty of it stunned Marcus into silence. Then quietly, "I'm sorry." Victoria set down her glass. "He used to say work is just work. It's who you are when you're not working that matters." Marcus felt the words land, settle into some space he hadn't known was empty. Yeah, that's exactly right." The conversation shifted after that, becoming something neither of them had expected. Real. Unguarded. Marcus told her about Sophie, about reading books together every Saturday at the library because they couldn't afford to buy them. Victoria told her about the novels she used to read before work consumed her life, before she started measuring success in revenue and market share instead of moments that mattered. They ordered. The server brought bread, and Marcus tried not to eat it too quickly, tried to pace himself like someone who belonged here. But Victoria pushed the basket toward him. "Please, I can't eat all of this." And something about the gesture, small kind, without judgment, made his throat tight. "Your daughter sounds special. She's everything." His hand went to his pocket, felt the crinkle of construction paper. "She made me this card. Wanted me to bring it for luck, I guess. Can I see it?" Marcus hesitated, then pulled it out, unfolding it carefully. Glitter cascaded onto the white tablecloth, catching candlelight like stars. Victoria leaned forward, reading Sophie's careful letters, and when she looked up, her eyes were bright. "Daddy, don't be lonely this Christmas." She read it aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's the sweetest thing I've ever seen." Marcus refolded the card, tucked it away. "She worries about me. Thinks I'm sad all the time. Are you?" The question was too direct, too honest for a first date, but something about this woman, the way she'd shared her own pain so freely, made Marcus want to answer truthfully. "I'm tired. I'm worried about money and whether I'm screwing up this whole parent thing, and if Sophie's going to grow up resenting me for not being able to give her more." But sad. He considered it. "No, not when I'm with her. She's the only reason I don't give up some days." Victoria's expression shifted, something vulnerable breaking through her polished exterior. "I don't have children. I don't have much of anything except work, And lately I'm starting to wonder if I built the wrong life. It's not wrong if it's what you wanted. That's the problem. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. I don't know anymore what I wanted versus what I thought I should want. I climbed so high trying to prove I was more than my father's daughter, more than the plumber's kid who got a scholarship to Northwestern. And now I'm at the top and I'm completely alone. The server returned and they ordered. Victoria chose the pasta. Marcus selected the cheapest entree he could find without making it obvious. When the server left, Victoria leaned back in her chair, studying him. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure. Do you like your work?" Marcus thought about Ray's words about showing up every day, about the weight of responsibility that felt both crushing and essential. "I don't love it, but I love why I do it. Sophie, she's everything. As long as I can provide for her, keep her safe, that's enough." Victoria shook her head slowly. "That's the thing people don't tell you. You can have everything and still feel empty." The words hit Marcus like a confession, like something she'd been holding inside for years. He looked at her, this woman, in her expensive clothes and her careful makeup and her executive job, and saw someone as lost as he sometimes felt. "Your father sounds like he was a good man." "He was." Victoria's voice wavered. "He taught me everything that matters, and I spent years trying to be different from him, trying to prove I was more. And in the process, I forgot what he actually taught me, which was that work is just work." She smiled sadly. "That who you are when you're not working is what counts." They were quiet for some moment, the restaurant humming around them with the conversations of strangers. The clink of silverware, the soft jazz playing from hidden speakers. Marcus felt something shift, some wall he'd built years ago starting to crack. "I told Sophie her mother died." He didn't know why he said it, why he offered up this particular truth. But once started, he couldn't stop. She left when Sophie was 13 months old, just walked out one day and never came back. And I didn't know how to explain that to a 3-year-old. Didn't know how to say your mother didn't want us enough to stay. So I said she died. It seemed kinder. Victoria absorbed this, her face thoughtful. Does Sophie believe it? She did. But lately she's been asking questions, wants to see pictures, wants to know what her mother was like. And I'm terrified of the day she figures out maybe the lie was mercy, or maybe it was cowardice. Marcus rubbed his face, feeling the exhaustion of the day settle into his bones. "I don't know anymore. I just know I'm trying my best, and my best never feels like enough." Victoria reached across the table, didn't touch him, but close enough that he felt the warmth of her hand. "For what it's worth, your daughter knows you're trying. That card she made you, that's not something kids make for fathers who aren't enough. That's love. Pure, uncomplicated love." Something in Marcus's chest cracked open. This woman, this stranger understood in a way no one else had. Not Ray with his steady wisdom, not Mrs. Chen with her gentle encouragement. This woman who'd built a life so different from his, saw him clearly, saw past the uniform and the calloused hands and the apartment that would never be featured in magazines. The server brought their meals and they ate slowly, the conversation flowing between them like water finding its natural course. Victoria told him about board meetings and quarterly reports and the exhausting dance of corporate politics. Marcus told her about fixing broken toilets at 3 in the morning and the satisfaction of leaving a building cleaner than he found it. Somewhere between the main course and dessert, Victoria's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and her expression changed. Problem, work emergency. Victoria scrolled through messages, her jaw tightening. The charity drive. We organized donations for low-income families, toys, clothes, food. The truck carrying everything is stuck in the snow on I-90. They can't make deliveries tonight. How many families? Over 120. Kids who were counting on Christmas morning. Marcus watched her stress level spike, saw the weight of responsibility settle across her shoulders. It was a look he recognized had worn himself every time rent was due, or Sophie needed something he couldn't quite afford. "Can they get the truck unstuck?" Victoria shook her head. Roads are closed. Snow's too heavy. They're saying morning at the earliest. Then those kids wake up to nothing. Exactly. Victoria set down her phone, and for the first time since he'd sat down, Marcus saw her mask slip completely. Saw the woman beneath the executive, the daughter still trying to honor her father's memory, the person who genuinely cared about more than profit margins. And Marcus Reed, who'd spent his entire adult life solving problems with nothing but determination and elbow grease, made a decision. I can help. Victoria looked up. I work at Lincoln Community Center. We have contacts, churches, shelters, volunteer networks all over the South Side. If you've got the list of addresses and access to those donations, we could organize deliveries tonight. Victoria stared at him. You'd do that? Of course. It's Christmas Eve. Those kids are counting on it. And there it was. The moment that changed everything. Victoria Hayes, CEO of a consulting firm worth $50 million, looked at Marcus Reed, janitor, who made $30,000 a year and saw someone offering everything when he had nothing to spare. Let's do it. They didn't ask for the check. Victoria threw down her corporate card and they were moving, pushing through the restaurant doors into the Chicago night, where snow fell thick and fast, covering the city in white. Marcus led her to his truck, a 2008 Ford Explorer with 180,000 miles and a child's car seat in the back, pink mittens on the dashboard, like small promises of the life he'd built. Victoria climbed into the passenger seat, her $2,000 coat dusted with snow, and looked around the interior that smelled of coffee and crayons and honest living. She thought of her penthouse apartment, all glass and steel and empty rooms, and realized she'd never felt more at home than in this stranger's truck. Marcus started the engine. You sure about this? It's going to be a long night. Victoria smiled, and for the first time in 10 years it felt genuine. I can't think of a better way to spend Christmas Eve. They made calls while Marcus drove carefully through snow-covered streets, Victoria coordinating with her assistant to get the address list and the location of the stranded truck. Marcus calling Ray Patterson, calling Reverend Williams at Southside Baptist, calling Maria at the community center, building a network of people who knew how to get things done when systems failed. Within 30 minutes, they had a plan. The warehouse sat on the industrial edge of the city, all corrugated metal and loading docks, and the stranded delivery truck, with its wheels spinning uselessly in ice. Marcus pulled up. Jumped out, assessed the situation with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent his life fixing things other people couldn't. The driver stood beside his cab looking defeated. Been trying for an hour. Roads too slick, trucks too heavy. I'm stuck until morning. Marcus walked around the truck, checked the angle, the ice buildup, the weight distribution. Then he turned to Victoria. We don't need to move the truck. We just need to move what's in it. And that was how Victoria Hayes, CEO executive woman, who'd spent 10 years buried in spreadsheets and conference rooms, found herself loading boxes of Christmas presents into the back of a janitor's Ford Explorer while snow fell and her expensive coat got ruined, and she felt more alive than any board meeting had ever made her feel. They worked in rhythm, Marcus directing Victoria, following the driver, helping where he could. The boxes were wrapped in bright paper, each one tagged with a child's name and age. Emma, 5 years old. Jacob, 8. Sophia, 3. Michael, 10. Each name a promise, each box a small miracle for families who didn't have many. When the Explorer was packed full back seat trunk every available inch, they climbed back in, and Marcus handed her a thermos of coffee he'd grabbed from the warehouse break room. Fair warning, it's terrible coffee. Victoria took a sip and laughed. Actually laughed. You're right. This is awful. But it was hot and they were moving, and for the first time in years, Victoria felt like she was doing something that mattered. Not because it would impress the board or boost quarterly earnings, but because children were counting on them, and they were the only ones who could make it right. The first stop was a duplex on the south side. Christmas lights strung crookedly across the porch windows, glowing with warm light. Marcus knocked gently, and a woman answered, early 30s, exhausted but hopeful. Marcus. Her voice broke. I thought they said the truck couldn't make it. We're here, Maria. Marcus carried boxes inside while Victoria waited by the truck, watching him move with the easy confidence of someone who belonged in this neighborhood, who knew these families, who cared about them beyond any charity drive headline. When he returned, his expression was soft. She's been working 3 jobs to keep that place. Her kids don't know how hard it's been. Victoria felt her carefully constructed world expanding, the edges of her understanding shifting. How do you know her community center? Her oldest comes to after-school programs. Maria brings him because she can't afford childcare, and we make sure he gets a hot meal and homework help. You know all these families. Marcus started the engine. Most of them. That's the neighborhood, Victoria. You show up. You help. You remember people's names. It matters. They continued through the night, stopping at house after house, each one a small universe of struggle and hope and the desperate mathematics of making ends meet. At one house, an elderly man opened the door, hands shaking with age or cold, or both. I didn't think anyone remembered me. Marcus smiled, and Victoria saw genuine affection in it. We remember Mr. Patterson. You served in the Navy for 20 years. You deserve to be remembered. The old man's eyes filled, and Victoria stood beside Marcus holding a box of warm clothes and canned goods, feeling something crack open in her chest. This was what Christmas was supposed to be, not boardrooms and profit margins and champagne toasts. This, standing on a cold porch while an old veteran cried with gratitude. At another house, a young mother answered with a baby on her hip. She couldn't have been older than 22, and when she saw the gifts, she burst into tears. Thank you. Thank you so much. Victoria helped carry boxes inside, and when she saw the bare living room, no tree, no decorations, just a crib and a couch and the stark evidence of poverty, her heart broke in ways she didn't know were possible. The young mother wiped her eyes. I've been trying, it's been so hard. Victoria knelt beside her. This woman, barely out of childhood herself, struggling to raise a baby alone. You're doing an amazing job. Your baby is lucky to have you. And she meant it. Every word. This woman, with nothing, was fighting harder than Victoria had ever fought, was showing more courage than any boardroom battle had ever required. Back in the truck, Marcus glanced at her. You okay? Victoria nodded, but her voice was thick. I just didn't realize how disconnected I'd become. From people, from what actually matters. Marcus drove slowly through streets transformed by snow. It's easy to lose sight of things when you're just trying to survive. I get it. They stopped at a shelter, next unloading gifts for the dozen families staying there. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, ran up to Marcus and hugged his legs. Mr. Marcus. You came? He laughed, ruffling her hair. Of course I did, Bella. Merry Christmas. The girl looked at Victoria shyly. Are you Mr. Marcus's friend? Victoria smiled. I am. Bella grinned. You're pretty. Victoria's heart melted. So are you. Inside the shelter, Victoria found herself sitting on the floor with a group of children, reading a donated Christmas story while they leaned in, close faces lit with wonder. She couldn't remember the last time she'd felt this kind of pure joy, this sense of connection to something beyond quarterly reports and shareholder meetings. When they finally finished, it was nearly 3 in the morning. Marcus and Victoria stood by the truck, exhausted, their coats dusted with snow. The city silent except for the soft hiss of falling flakes and the distant sound of a siren. One more stop. Marcus's voice was quiet. Where my place? I need to check on Sophie. Victoria nodded, and they drove through empty streets, the Ford Explorer's heater fighting against the cold. Marcus's apartment building was modest brick and aging but well-maintained, the kind of place where people worked hard and looked out for each other. Inside, Mrs. Chen was asleep on the couch. Marcus woke her gently, paid her, thanked her. She left, and the apartment fell silent. Marcus led Victoria down the hallway to Sophie's room. The door was cracked open, and inside a small nightlight cast a soft glow. Sophie was asleep. Dark hair spread across the pillow, a stuffed bear tucked under her arm. Marcus stood in the doorway watching his daughter, and Victoria stood beside him. "She's beautiful," Victoria whispered, afraid to break the spell. "She's everything." Marcus's voice was thick with emotion, and Victoria understood. This was what mattered. Not titles or money or success measured in any conventional way. This love, this commitment, this man who worked himself to exhaustion so his daughter could sleep safe and warm. Marcus pulled the door closed gently, and they walked back to the living room. He offered her tea, and she accepted, sinking onto the worn couch while he moved around the small kitchen. The apartment was modest but clean, filled with evidence of Sophie's life. Drawings on the fridge books stacked on the coffee table, a small plastic Christmas tree in the corner, decorated with handmade ornaments. Marcus handed her a mug, and they sat in comfortable silence. Outside, the snow had stopped, leaving the world blanketed in white. "Thank you for tonight." Victoria's voice was soft. "For letting me be part of this." Marcus smiled. "I should be thanking you. I couldn't have done it without you." Victoria shook her head. "You could have. You do this all the time. I'm just realizing how much I've been missing." Marcus looked at her, his expression serious. "You're not missing it anymore." And in that moment, Victoria knew he was right. Knew something fundamental had shifted, that she couldn't go back to her old life, couldn't pretend the last 6 hours hadn't shown her everything she'd been running from. "Can I see you again?" The words hung between them, fragile and essential. Marcus held her gaze, and she saw the same uncertainty she felt, the same hope warring with self-protection. "I'd like that." His voice was careful, testing the weight of possibility. But before Victoria could respond, Marcus's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, and his face went pale. "It's Mrs. Chen." He answered, his voice tight. "Hello." Victoria watched his expression shift from confusion to fear. "What?" "When okay. Okay, I'm coming." He hung up, hands gripping the steering wheel that wasn't there. "It's Sophie. She's burning up." Mrs. Chen didn't want to call earlier, but the fever's getting worse. Victoria's heart dropped. "Turn around, we need to get back." Marcus was already moving, grabbing his keys. They ran down the stairs, Victoria's expensive heels slipping on icy steps. Marcus drove too fast through empty streets, his jaw clenched, and Victoria could see the terror in his eyes. The fear of every parent who couldn't fix what was broken, who couldn't protect the one person who mattered most. They pulled up to the building, and Marcus was out of the truck before it fully stopped running up the stairs. Victoria followed, her breath coming in gasps. Inside, Mrs. Chen met them at the door, apologetic and worried. "I'm so sorry. She woke up crying about an hour ago. I gave her water and Tylenol, but she's really hot." Marcus rushed to Sophie's room. The little girl was awake now, her face flushed, small body trembling. "Daddy, I'm here, sweetheart. I'm here." He took her temperature. 103.8. Victoria appeared in the doorway. "Marcus, that's too high. We need to take her to urgent care." Marcus nodded, already moving, his hands shaking as he wrapped Sophie in a blanket and lifted her. Victoria ran ahead, opening doors, holding the truck's back door as Marcus settled Sophie in her car seat. Victoria climbed into the back, holding Sophie's hand while Marcus drove. The little girl's eyes fluttered open, confused. "Who are you?" "I'm Victoria. I'm a friend of your daddy's." Sophie's voice was small, scared. "Am I sick a little bit? But we're taking you to the doctor and they'll make you feel better. Will you stay?" Victoria's throat tightened. "I'll stay." The urgent care center blazed with fluorescent light, a harsh contrast to the dark streets. Marcus carried Sophie inside, and Victoria followed. Watching this man who'd worked all night, delivering presents to strangers, now focused entirely on his daughter. Everything else falling away. The night staff was tired but efficient. Forms to fill out, questions to answer, insurance cards and co-pays, and all the mundane machinery of healthcare that felt cruel when your child was burning up in your arms. They called Sophie back, and Marcus looked at Victoria. "You don't have to stay." "I'm staying." And she did. sat beside him in the examination room while the doctor checked Sophie's ears and throat and temperature, watched Marcus hold his daughter's hand, murmuring reassurance being strong, when Victoria could see he was terrified. Ear infection. The doctor's voice was kind, severe but treatable. We'll start antibiotics now and monitor her fever for the next hour. Relief flooded Marcus's face. She's going to be okay. She's going to be fine. They moved to a recovery room, Sophie already drowsy from the medicine. Victoria sat in a plastic chair while Marcus perched on the edge of his daughter's bed, watching her breathe, counting each inhale like a prayer answered. Victoria checked her phone. 47 missed calls. 93 unread emails. Her VP, James, had left a voicemail. Where are you? Board meeting 9 a.m. Meridian signing. You need to be here. She looked at Marcus, at Sophie, at the small family that had led her into their orbit for one impossible night, and felt her carefully constructed life cracking apart. I have to go. Her voice was barely audible. Marcus turned. I know. Can I see you again? And there it was. The question that mattered more than any board meeting, any contract, any measure of success she'd spent 10 years chasing. Marcus wanted to say yes. She could see it in his eyes. But he also said, I don't know if that's a good idea. Why? Because Sophie already asked if you're my friend. Because I can't let her get attached if this isn't real. If it's just one magical night that doesn't fit into our actual lives. Victoria stood, moved closer. It is real. Is it? Or did we just have one perfect night that we'll remember fondly, but that doesn't work when the sun comes up? She had no answer. Just the weight of her old life pulling at her, the demands of her board and her mother, and a world that would never understand why she'd spent Christmas Eve delivering presents with a janitor. Victoria scrawled her number on a receipt from her purse, left it on the table beside Sophie's bed. Then she walked out into the cold dawn, called an Uber, and watched Marcus's apartment building disappear behind her as the car pulled away. Victoria's Uber pulled up to Hayes Consulting Group at 8:45. The glass tower reflected morning sun off fresh snow, 42 stories of steel and ambition rising above the Chicago skyline like a monument to everything she'd built. She hadn't been home, hadn't showered, hadn't changed. Her $2,000 coat was stained with salt and road grime. Her makeup smudged her hair, falling from its professional twist. The security guard in the lobby did a double take, but said nothing. Victoria took the elevator to the 42nd floor, walking past assistants who stared past James Chen, who stood from his desk with alarm written across his face. The boardroom was already full. 12 directors sat around the mahogany table, her mother, Elena Hayes, at the head. 65 years old, silver hair, perfect suit, immaculate expression carved from ice. The woman who'd built this company alongside Victoria's father, who'd transformed grief into ruthless efficiency, who'd blamed her daughter for a death that wasn't anyone's fault. Victoria walked in without apology, took her seat. Elena's voice was controlled fury. Where have you been, handling the charity drive emergency? By disappearing for 12 hours, the Meridian team waited until 11 last night. We had to reschedule their signing. Then we reschedule. Some things matter more than signatures. Board member Harrison leaned forward, his jowls quivering with indignation. Victoria, your behavior lately has been concerning. Missing meetings distracted during presentations. I delivered Christmas presents to 120 families last night. Families who would have woken up to nothing because our logistics failed. That's what our charity drive was supposed to accomplish. When the system broke, I fixed it. Elena stood, her hands flat on the table. Alone, in the middle of the night. With whom? With someone who understands what service actually means. The room went silent. James Chen shifted uncomfortably in his chair and slid his tablet toward the center of the table. Photos filled the screen. Victoria at the urgent care center at 3 in the morning. Victoria loading boxes into an old Ford Explorer. Victoria entering a modest apartment building on the south side. Board member Lydia Cross spoke, her voice tight with concern. Someone's been following you, Victoria. These photos were sent to the Tribune. They're asking questions. Who is this man? Why were you in those neighborhoods? Victoria looked at each face around the table, saw judgment and fear and the desperate need to control a narrative that didn't fit their world. Let me tell you about the man in those photos. Her voice was steady, clear. His name is Marcus Reed. He's a custodian who works 2 jobs to support his daughter. Last night he taught me what this company was supposed to stand for. Elena's expression hardened. Victoria, I'm not finished. Victoria stood, matching her mother's stance. My father didn't build Hayes Consulting to make wealthy people wealthier. He built it because he believed in service, in helping communities, in giving back. When was the last time any of us actually did that? Harrison sputtered. We donate millions to tax-advantaged foundations that fund galas and plaques with our names on them. When's the last time you delivered food to a family who couldn't afford Christmas dinner? When's the last time you sat with someone who was struggling and actually helped? Cross leaned back in her chair. What are you saying? I'm saying. We've turned charity into marketing. We've turned service into strategy. We've forgotten why we exist. Elena's voice cut through the room like a blade. What you're saying is you spent the night with a janitor and now you're having some kind of crisis. What I'm saying is I won't apologize for living my life. If you want to vote me out as CEO, do it, but know that I'll take this story public. Let's see how the press reacts when they learn Hayes Consulting fired its CEO for actually helping people. Elena's eyes narrowed. You're bluffing. Try me. The tension in the room was suffocating. Then James Chen stood. I vote to keep Victoria as CEO. The room erupted. Harrison shouted over Cross, who was arguing with another board member, but slowly, one by one, they voted. When the tally came, it was 5-4 in Victoria's favor. Barely, but enough. Elena gathered her papers, her movements precise and controlled. This isn't over. Yes, it is. Victoria's voice was quiet but firm. The board filed out, leaving Victoria and Elena alone in the glass-walled room overlooking Chicago. The city stretched below them, clean and white under fresh snow, and Victoria thought of Marcus's apartment. Sophie's paper Christmas tree, the families who'd cried when they opened their doors to find gifts they'd stopped hoping for. You're throwing everything away. Elena's voice shook, and for the first time Victoria heard fear beneath the anger. Your father built this from nothing, and I'm finally living up to what he built it for. Dad was a plumber. Mom. He understood what hard work meant. He wouldn't recognize what you've turned this company into. I was trying to preserve his legacy by turning it into everything he stood against. Elena moved to the window, her back to Victoria. You don't understand what it was like, watching him die, knowing you weren't there. I called him that night. Victoria's voice cracked. 3 times. He didn't answer. Did you know that I tried, Mom? I was in a meeting, but I saw his calls and I tried to get back to him. By the time I reached the hospital, it was too late. I've carried that guilt for 10 years. Elena turned and Victoria saw tears tracking down her mother's face for the first time since the funeral. I blamed you because I couldn't blame myself. Elena's voice was barely audible. Because I didn't notice how sick he was. Because I thought work was more important than watching for warning signs. I saw you making the same mistakes, and I couldn't watch you destroy yourself the way he did. Dad didn't destroy himself with work. He had a heart attack. It wasn't your fault or mine. Elena wiped her eyes with trembling fingers. I don't know how to stop being angry. Then figure it out, because I'm not waiting anymore. Victoria walked out, leaving her mother standing alone in the boardroom. She went to her office, closed the door, and finally checked her phone. 47 new messages, most from board members and executives, all demanding explanations or offering support or positioning themselves for whatever came next. Nothing from Marcus. She typed out a message. Thank you for last night. Is Sophie okay? Sent it. Waited. No response. She tried calling. It went to voicemail. An hour passed. Then 2. Victoria worked through emails mechanically, her mind replaying the night. The way Marcus had looked at her in the candlelight. The way he'd held Sophie with such fierce tenderness. The moment he'd asked if this was real or just one perfect night that didn't fit into actual lives. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. The message read, "This is Jennifer Reed. I heard you've been spending time with my daughter. We need to talk." Victoria stared at the screen, ice flooding her veins. Sophie's mother. The woman Marcus thought had abandoned them, who he told his daughter was dead. The ghost that had shaped everything about their small family. She typed back, "How did you get my number?" The response came quickly. "I have my ways. Coffee tomorrow, Corner Bakery on Clark, 10 a.m. Victoria's hands shook as she typed, "I'll be there." The coffee shop was generic and warm, full of morning commuters and the smell of burnt espresso. Victoria arrived early, ordered tea she didn't drink, sat at a table by the window. When Jennifer walked in, Victoria recognized her from the single photo she'd seen in Marcus's apartment, tucked in a drawer Sophie had opened while looking for crayons. Older now, thinner, but the same sharp cheekbones and dark eyes that Sophie had inherited. Jennifer slid into the seat across from her, no preamble. "I know you're wondering who I am. I know exactly who you are. Do you?" Jennifer's voice was bitter. "I'm the woman who left her baby. The monster who walked away. That's who everyone thinks I am. Marcus said you couldn't handle being a mother." Jennifer laughed, and it was the saddest sound Victoria had heard. "Is that what he told Sophie?" "He told Sophie you died." Jennifer's face crumpled. She closed her eyes, breathed deep, steadied herself. "I need you to understand something. I was 26 when Sophie was born. I'd wanted a baby so badly, thought it would fix everything wrong in my life. But the moment they put her in my arms, I felt nothing. Just panic and this crushing weight that I couldn't lift. Postpartum depression. More than that. Psychosis. I heard voices telling me Sophie would be better off dead. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Marcus was working 2 jobs trying to keep us afloat, and I was drowning." Jennifer pulled a tissue from her purse, twisted it between her fingers. "One night when Sophie was 13 months old, I stood over her crib with a pillow." Victoria's breath caught. "I didn't do it." Jennifer's voice shook. "I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, and then I dropped the pillow and walked out of the apartment and didn't stop walking until I was on a bus to Milwaukee. I left because I was terrified of what I'd do if I stayed." "Did you get help?" "Eventually. Took me 6 months to even admit I needed it. I've been in therapy for 6 years. Medication, group sessions, the whole thing. I'm stable now. I have a job as a medical billing specialist, an apartment. I'm not the person I was. Why come back now? Because Sophie deserves to know I didn't leave because she wasn't enough. I left because I wasn't enough." Jennifer pulled out her phone, showed Victoria a photo, a check stub. "I've been sending child support, $500 a month through an intermediary. Marcus doesn't know." Victoria studied the records, the steady payments dating back 5 years. "Why not contact him directly?" "Because I was ashamed, because I thought if I could just get better, if I could become someone worthy, then maybe I could explain. But time kept passing and I kept putting it off. And now Sophie's 7 years old and thinks I'm dead. What do you want from me? I want you to help me tell Marcus I'm alive. I want supervised visitation. I'm not trying to take her away. I just want a chance to explain, to be part of her life, even in a small way." Victoria's mind raced. Marcus would never agree to this. The betrayal, the disruption to Sophie's stability. "My lawyers already filed a petition with family court." Jennifer's voice was firm. "I didn't want to blindside Marcus, but I needed legal standing. The hearing is in 2 weeks. You can't just..." "I can and I will. I'm not asking permission. I'm asking you to help him understand that I'm not the enemy. That I was sick, I got better, and I love my daughter, even if I haven't been able to show it." Victoria stood her chair, scraping against tile. "I need to tell Marcus. I'm meeting him tomorrow at the community center where he works. You can tell him first if you want, but either way, he's going to know soon." Victoria walked out into the cold, her hands shaking as she dialed Marcus's number. This time he answered. "We need to talk." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Can you meet me?" What's wrong? Not over the phone, please. An hour later, Victoria stood outside Lincoln Community Center watching Marcus walk toward her across the parking lot. He looked exhausted. Dark circles under his eyes, moving like a man carrying weight he couldn't set down. Sophie. Okay? Fever broke this morning. She's with Mrs. Chen resting. Good. That's good. Victoria wrapped her arms around herself. Marcus, I met with someone today. Someone who wants to see you. Who? Jennifer. Marcus went very still, his face draining of color. What? She's in Chicago. She contacted me. She wants... No. The word came out flat, final. Absolutely not. Marcus, she's sick. She was sick. Postpartum psychosis. Depression. She left to protect Sophie, not because... She left because she was a coward. Marcus's voice rose and people in the parking lot turned to look. She walked out on a 13-month-old baby and never looked back. She doesn't get to come back now. She's been sending child support for 5 years. Did you know that Marcus stared at her? What, $500 a month through an intermediary? She's been trying to make things right. With money, Marcus laughed bitterly. She thinks she can buy her way back into Sophie's life. She's filed for visitation rights. The court hearing is in 2 weeks. The words landed like a punch. Marcus took a step back, his hands clenching into fists. She can't do that. She can and she is. Then I'll fight it. I'll get a lawyer. I'll show the court she abandoned us. She has documentation of her illness, her treatment, her stability. She's not asking for custody, just supervised visits. And what happens to Sophie when the mother she thinks is dead suddenly shows up wanting to play? Marcus's voice cracked. What am I supposed to tell my daughter? The truth, that her mother was sick and got better, that she didn't leave because Sophie wasn't enough. You don't understand. Marcus turned away at his shoulders shaking. You haven't raised a child alone. You haven't explained to a 3-year-old why mommy isn't coming back. You don't know what it's like to watch your kid cry herself to sleep asking what she did wrong. You're right. I don't understand, but I know what it's like to carry guilt for something that wasn't your fault, and I know Sophie deserves the truth. The truth is her mother abandoned her. That's all Sophie needs to know. Is it? Or are you protecting yourself as much as you're protecting her? Marcus wheeled on her, fury in his eyes. How dare you? I'm trying to help. By taking Jennifer's side. By telling me that running from this won't make it go away. Victoria's voice softened. She's coming whether you want her to or not. The question is, whether you meet her with Sophie's best interests in mind or just your own anger. Get out! Marcus's voice was cold. Just get out! Victoria felt tears burning behind her eyes but refused to let them fall. Fine, but when Jennifer shows up tomorrow, don't say I didn't warn you. She walked to her car, hands shaking too hard to get the key in the ignition. Behind her, Marcus stood in the parking lot and Victoria could see in the rearview mirror the moment his anger collapsed into fear. The next afternoon, Marcus arrived at the community center for his shift to find a woman waiting by the entrance. He knew her immediately. The shape of her face, the way she held herself, the ghost he'd tried to bury for 6 years. Jennifer. She looked older, thinner, her eyes carrying the kind of exhaustion that came from fighting battles no one else could see. Marcus. Her voice trembled. Thank you for seeing me. I didn't have a choice. You filed legal papers. I didn't know how else to reach you. They stood 10 feet apart in the cold parking lot, everything unsaid, sitting between them like broken glass. You left. Marcus's voice was steady, but his hands shook. You walked out on our daughter when she was barely a year old. I was sick, Marcus. Really sick. I wasn't thinking clearly. So you ran. So I left before I hurt her. Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. I stood over her crib with a pillow in my hands. Do you understand what I'm saying? I was going to kill our baby because the voices in my head told me she'd be better off dead. Marcus took a step back, the horror of it stealing his breath. I dropped the pillow and I ran. I got on a bus, and I didn't stop until I was in Milwaukee. I checked myself into a psychiatric hospital, and I stayed there for 3 months. Jennifer wiped her eyes with shaking hands. I've been in therapy ever since. On medication. Working to become someone who deserves to know her daughter. You should have told me. I was ashamed and terrified you'd never let me near her again. I wouldn't have. Marcus's jaw clenched. You think because you got treatment because you sent some checks that erases what you did? I don't think it erases anything. I just want a chance to explain to Sophie that I didn't leave because of her. She thinks you're dead. Jennifer's face crumpled. I know. Victoria told me. You had no right to contact her. She's not part of this. She's part of your life. That makes her part of this whether you like it or not. Marcus wanted to argue, but the truth of it cut too deep. Victoria had become part of his life in one impossible night, had shown him a version of himself that didn't have to be defined by struggle and survival. And now, everything was falling apart. The court date is January 7th. Jennifer's voice was quiet. I'm asking for supervised visitation. Twice a month, 3 hours each with you present or someone you trust. And if I fight it, then we go to court and a judge decides. But I have documentation of my illness and treatment. I have proof I've been sending support. And I have the legal right to try. Marcus thought of Sophie, bright, innocent, asking questions about the mother in the photo she'd found in his drawer. Thought of the lie he'd told to protect her, the way it had grown and hardened until it felt like truth. If I agree to this, it's on my terms. You see her when I say where I say. And if you hurt her, if you disappear again, I won't. I promise you, Marcus. I won't. Your promises don't mean anything to me. Then let me earn back your trust. A car pulled into the parking lot. Victoria's Mercedes, sleek and out of place in this neighborhood. She got out, walked toward them with careful steps. I wasn't sure you'd both be here. Marcus didn't look at her. You set this up. I asked Victoria to come. Jennifer's voice was steady. Because I think she cares about both of you. And because someone needs to think about what's best for Sophie instead of what's easiest for us. You don't get to talk about what's best for Sophie. Marcus's fury was ice cold. You left her, and I've spent 6 years getting well enough to come back. Jennifer stepped closer. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking you to let me try to be a mother, even in a small way. Even if it's just 2 afternoons a month where I get to see her smile and hear her laugh and tell her that I love her. The words hung in the cold air. Marcus looked at Jennifer, at Victoria, at these two women who'd crashed into his carefully controlled life and blown it apart. I need to talk to Sophie first. His voice was hoarse. She deserves to know the truth before you show up. I agree. And we do this slow. Supervised visits in public places. No overnights. No picking her up from school. Nothing that confuses her about who her parent is. Whatever you think is right. Marcus turned to Victoria and you. I don't know what we are or what last night meant, but if you're going to be part of this, you need to be all in. I can't handle someone else who leaves when things get hard. Victoria met his eyes. I'm not going anywhere. Jennifer looked between them, understanding dawning on her face. You too? It's complicated. Victoria's voice was soft. Life's complicated. Jennifer smiled sadly. But if you found each other, don't let my mess ruin it. Marcus wanted to be angry at Victoria, wanted to blame her for bringing Jennifer back into their lives. But standing in the parking lot with snow starting to fall, he realized she'd done the only thing that mattered. She'd told the truth, even when it was hard, even when it would have been easier to stay silent. I need to go home. Talk to Sophie. Marcus looked at Jennifer. Give me your number. I'll call you after. Jennifer handed him a card with her phone number written in careful script. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. He walked to his truck and Victoria followed. Marcus. Her voice stopped him. I'm sorry. I know this is... You did the right thing. His voice was quiet. I hate it, but you did the right thing. Can I come with you? When you tell Sophie... Marcus looked at her. This woman who'd walked into his life by accident and refused to walk away, even when everything got messy and complicated and impossibly hard. Yeah, I'd like that. They drove in silence to his apartment where Sophie was coloring at the kitchen table. Her fever gone, her energy back. She looked up when they walked in, her face lighting up. Daddy. And the pretty lady from the hospital, Victoria, knelt beside her chair. Hi, Sophie. How are you feeling? Much better. Sophie showed her the drawing, a house with a crooked Christmas tree and 3 stick figures. That's Daddy, that's me, and that's you. Victoria's throat tightened. It's beautiful. Marcus pulled out a chair, sat down heavily. Sophie, baby, we need to talk about something important. The little girl set down her crayon, sensing the shift in tone. Am I in trouble? No. You're not in trouble. Marcus took her small hand in his. Remember how I told you your mommy had died? Sophie nodded, her eyes wide. I need to tell you the truth. Your mommy didn't die. She got very sick in her mind and she had to go away to get better, and now she's better and she wants to meet you. Sophie processed this with the careful logic of a 7-year-old. So you lied. I did. I'm sorry. I thought it would hurt less than knowing she left. Sophie pulled her hand away, her face crumpling. Did I make her leave? No. Marcus's voice broke. Never. She left because she was sick, not because of anything you did. You were perfect. You are perfect. Can I see her? Do you want to? Sophie looked at the drawing at the 3 stick figures that represented the family she wanted. I want to know her face so I can remember. Okay. We'll arrange it. But Daddy will be there the whole time. Okay. Sophie climbed into his lap, and Marcus held her while she cried for a mother she'd never known, for the lie that had protected her, for the truth that was scarier and bigger than anything her 7-year-old heart knew how to hold. Victoria stood by the window watching the snowfall and thought about the life she'd built, the success and the loneliness and the careful walls that kept everyone at a safe distance. Then she thought about this man and his daughter, about Jennifer fighting to be a mother again, about the messy, complicated, impossible business of loving people who came with histories and hurts and no easy answers. Sophie looked up at Victoria, tears on her cheeks. Will you be there too? When I meet her? If you want me to be. I do. You make Daddy not scared. Marcus met Victoria's eyes over his daughter's head, and something passed between them, understanding maybe, or the beginning of trust. Outside the city prepared for night, and somewhere in Chicago, Jennifer Reed waited for a phone call that would let her back into the life she'd left behind. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in 6 years, it was also possible. The community center's activity room smelled of floor cleaner and old carpet sunlight, cutting through high windows in dusty beams. Marcus had arrived 30 minutes early, arranging 3 chairs in a small circle, while his daughter watched from the doorway. Sophie wore her Sunday dress, the blue one, with white flowers, her hair pulled back with clips that kept slipping loose. You think she'll like me? Marcus knelt beside his daughter, steadying his hands on her small shoulders. She already likes you. She came all this way to meet you. But what if I'm different than she remembers? You were a baby. You're supposed to be different. Sophie nodded, but Marcus could see the tremor in her chin, the way her fingers twisted the fabric of her dress. Victoria arrived 10 minutes before 2, carrying a bag with coloring supplies and juice boxes, practical offerings, that made Marcus love her a little more. How are you holding up? Ask me after. His throat felt tight, constricted by years of protection that he was about to dismantle. When Jennifer walked through the door at exactly 2 o'clock, she moved like someone approaching sacred ground. Her eyes found Sophie immediately, and something in her expression cracked. Recognition and grief and hope all tangled together. Hi, Sophie. I'm Jennifer. The little girl studied her with scientific precision, cataloging features, searching for herself in the stranger's face. You look older than the picture. Jennifer's laugh was shaky. I am. 7 years older. Sophie took 3 steps forward, stopped, reconsidered. Daddy said you were sick, that you had to go away. That's right. I was very sick in my mind, but I got help and I'm better now. Why didn't you come back sooner? The question hung in the air, brutal in its simplicity. Jennifer glanced at Marcus, seeking permission to be honest. He gave the smallest nod because protecting Sophie from truth had only created bigger problems. Because I was afraid. Afraid you'd hate me for leaving. Afraid I wasn't strong enough yet to be the mother you deserved. Do you still get sick? Sometimes my mind tries to trick me, but I take medicine and talk to a doctor, and that helps me stay healthy. Sophie processed this with the pragmatism of a child who'd learned early that adults were complicated. Can I see your hands? Jennifer extended them palms up, and Sophie walked closer. She touched Jennifer's fingers one by one, tracing the lines comparing the shape of the nails to her own. Daddy's hands are rough. He works with them. I know. He works harder than anyone I've ever met. Sophie looked up, and Marcus saw the moment something shifted in his daughter's eyes. You have my eyebrows. And my nose. She touched her own nose, then reached toward Jennifer's face. We match. We do. Jennifer held perfectly still, barely breathing as Sophie's fingertips brushed her cheekbone. Can I hug you? Jennifer's eyes filled. I would love that more than anything. Sophie stepped into her mother's arms, and the embrace was tentative, at first uncertain. But then Sophie's small hands gripped Jennifer's shirt and held on. Jennifer's shoulders shook with silent sobs, her face pressed against Sophie's hair, and Marcus had to look away before his own composure shattered. Victoria touched his arm, anchoring him. The visit lasted 90 minutes. They sat on the floor with crayons and paper, Sophie drawing, while Jennifer asked careful questions. What's your favorite subject in school? What do you like to read? Tell me about your friends. Sophie answered each one thoughtfully, and gradually the stiffness left her posture. I made you something. Sophie handed Jennifer a drawing, 2 stick figures holding hands labeled Me and Jennifer. In the corner, 2 more figures, Daddy and Victoria. This is the most beautiful thing anyone's ever given me. Can I keep it? Sophie nodded. But I'll make more for next time. Those 2 words, next time, nearly undid Marcus. Jennifer folded the paper like it was woven from gold thread, tucked it carefully into her purse. When the visit ended, Sophie hugged Jennifer goodbye with less hesitation than before. She waved from the doorway as Jennifer walked to her car, and Marcus watched his daughter's face, searching for signs of trauma or confusion. Instead, he saw something that looked like peace. After Mrs. Chen collected Sophie, Marcus and Victoria remained in the empty room. He sat on the floor where his daughter had sat, surrounded by scattered crayons and discarded drawings. That was harder than I thought it would be. Victoria settled beside him. Harder how I wanted her to be awful, wanted proof that I was right to keep them apart. His voice cracked, but she was gentle and patient and everything Sophie needed. That doesn't make you wrong, it just means Jennifer did the work. What if Sophie starts to love her more than me? The fear he'd been carrying for weeks finally had words. Victoria took his hand, lacing their fingers together. That little girl loves you with her whole heart. Room for Jennifer doesn't mean less room for you. Love doesn't work that way. How do you know? Because I watched her draw you into that picture first. You're her home, Marcus. Jennifer's just someone she's learning to include. 2 weeks later, Cook County Family Court smelled like industrial cleaner and old paper. Marcus wore the navy suit Victoria had bought him, the fabric stiff and unfamiliar against his skin. His court-appointed attorney David Park carried a briefcase that spilled files with every step a man drowning in caseload. Jennifer sat across the aisle with Rebecca Moss, a lawyer who looked like she'd never lost a family court battle. Her gray suit was pressed sharp enough to cut her presentation materials organized in color-coded folders. Judge Sarah Harrison entered, gray hair, scraped back reading glasses, suspended from a chain, an expression that suggested she'd heard every excuse and believed none of them. She reviewed the petition with quick efficiency, then looked up. Ms. Reed, you're petitioning for supervised visitation with your daughter Sophie, age 7, after a 6-year absence. Mr. Reed opposes. Ms. Moss, you're opening. Rebecca Moss stood, her voice carrying the weight of practiced authority. Your Honor, my client doesn't dispute that she left. What we're here to establish is context. Why she left, what she's done since, and why supervised visitation serves the child's best interests. She laid out medical records like evidence in a murder trial, postpartum psychosis diagnosis from Mercy Hospital, admission records to Milwaukee Psychiatric Center, 6 years of therapy notes documenting consistent treatment, bank statements showing $30,000 in anonymous child support payments. Ms. Reed left to protect her daughter from a documented mental health crisis. She sought treatment, maintained it religiously, and built a stable life. She's asking for 2 supervised visits per month, 3 hours each with Mr. Reed present. This is not abandonment seeking redemption. This is illness seeking recovery. David Park's rebuttal focused on trauma and stability. He painted Marcus as the hero of Sophie's story, the father who stayed, who worked double shifts, who built security from nothing. But his presentation lacked the clinical precision of Moss's case, and Marcus could feel the balance tipping. Jennifer took the stand, her voice steady as she recounted the worst moments of her life. The voices that told her Sophie would be better off dead. The moment she stood over the crib with a pillow. The decision to leave before she could act on intrusive thoughts that terrified her. I left because staying made me dangerous. Walking away was the only way to keep her safe. Judge Harrison's expression remained neutral. Why no contact? Why let Mr. Reed believe you were gone forever? Shame. Jennifer's voice dropped. I thought if I could just fix myself first, become someone worthy, then maybe I could explain. But time kept passing, and the longer I waited, the harder it became. Cross-examination was gentle but thorough. David Park asked about the anonymous support payments. Why hide them? Jennifer explained she didn't want credit for doing the bare minimum. Asked about the timing of her return, she admitted she'd been ready for 2 years, but fear had paralyzed her. When Marcus took the stand, he spoke from a place deeper than strategy. This is about what Sophie needs: stability, consistency. A father who's never left and never will. I don't trust Jennifer not to disappear again, and I won't let my daughter's heart get broken a second time. Rebecca Moss's cross-examination was surgical. She asked about the lie telling Sophie her mother was dead. Asked if Marcus had considered that the truth, however complicated, might have served Sophie better than fiction. Asked whether his opposition to visitation was truly about Sophie's welfare or his own unresolved anger. Marcus wanted to argue, but Victoria's words echoed in his head. You're making decisions based on anger, not Sophie's needs. He faltered on the stand, admitted the lie had been as much about his pain as Sophie's protection, and felt the case slip further from his grasp. During lunch recess, Marcus found Victoria in the hallway, his head in his hands. I'm losing her. You're not losing anyone. Victoria sat beside him on the hard bench. The worst outcome is Jennifer gets supervised visits. Sophie still lives with you, still loves you. But what if... Stop. Victoria turned him to face her. That little girl drew a picture with all 4 of us in it. She's not choosing between you and Jennifer. She's figuring out how to love everyone. The afternoon session brought character witnesses. Ray Patterson testified about Marcus's dedication, his work ethic, the way he prioritized Sophie above everything. Mrs. Chen described years of watching Sophie flourish under Marcus's care. Both were compelling, but both also admitted that Sophie seemed well-adjusted, happy, not traumatized by recent events. For Jennifer, Rebecca Moss called Dr. Amanda Torres the therapist who'd worked with Jennifer for 6 years. The psychologist's testimony was devastating in its clinical precision. She described Jennifer's medication compliance, her cognitive behavioral therapy progress, her development of healthy coping mechanisms. She showed graphs of Jennifer's mental health scores over time, a steady upward trajectory from crisis to stability. The woman I see today bears no resemblance to the patient in crisis 6 years ago. She's done the work, Your Honor. Sustained, difficult, transformative work. When both sides rested, Judge Harrison called a brief recess. Marcus sat frozen while the courtroom emptied, Victoria's hand steady in his. 20 minutes later, the judge returned with a folder of notes. This case is complicated because both parties have legitimate claims. Ms. Reed experienced a documented medical crisis and sought appropriate treatment. Mr. Reed has been an exemplary single father. Sophie, by all accounts, is thriving. The courtroom held its collective breath. However, research consistently shows that children benefit from relationships with both parents when it's safe to do so. Ms. Reed has demonstrated stability, compliance with treatment, and genuine commitment to her daughter's well-being. Therefore, I'm granting supervised visitation. 2 visits per month, 3 hours each with Mr. Reed or another court-approved supervisor present. We'll review this arrangement in 6 months to assess whether modifications are appropriate. The gavel fell. Jennifer covered her face, shoulders shaking with relief. Marcus sat motionless, processing victory that felt like defeat. Victoria squeezed his hand and he realized she'd been right all along. He hadn't lost Sophie. He just had to learn to share. Outside the courthouse, January wind cut through their coats. Jennifer approached cautiously, her eyes red from crying. "I know you're angry." Marcus looked at her, this woman who'd once shared his bed and his dreams and then shattered both. "I'm tired, but the judge made her ruling. I promise I won't let you down. Your promises don't mean much to me yet, but I'm willing to let you earn them back. 1 visit at a time." After Jennifer left, Marcus and Victoria stood on the steps watching traffic navigate slush. The city moved around them, indifferent to the small tragedy and hope that had played out in the courtroom 4B. "I need to ask you something." Marcus turned to face Victoria fully. "Okay. What are we doing?" Victoria pulled her coat tighter against the wind. "What do you mean?" "This. Us. You showed up for the visit with Jennifer. You came to court. You're standing here when you could be anywhere else. Why? Because I care about you, about Sophie. Do you? Or are you just playing some rescue fantasy with the working-class single dad?" The accusation was cruel, born from fear and exhaustion. Victoria absorbed it without flinching. "If that's what you think, you don't know me at all." Her voice was quiet but firm. "I came because that night delivering presents showed me what was missing from my life, and I refuse to go back to pretending that success means anything without connection to real people living real lives." Marcus's shoulders sagged. "I'm sorry. I'm scared. So am I." "Of what?" "That I'll fail you both. That my world and yours can't actually fit together. That I don't know how to be vulnerable enough for this to work." Victoria's eyes filled. "I'm a CEO who spent 10 years avoiding intimacy. You're a father who spent 6 years not trusting anyone. We're both damaged in ways that matter. Maybe damaged people fit together better than perfect ones." Marcus reached for her hand, the calloused fingers wrapping around hers. "Christmas Eve, you sat at the wrong table, and somehow it became the rightest thing that ever happened to me." "Where are you going with this? Marry me." The words came out rough, unpolished. Nothing like the romantic proposals Victoria had imagined in her youth. No ring, no restaurant, just a man on courthouse steps in a borrowed suit asking the impossible. "What I know, it's fast. I know we barely know each other." His voice gained strength. "But I also know I've never been this certain about anything. You make me believe I'm more than my job and my circumstances. And maybe I make you believe that success isn't measured in spreadsheets." "Marcus, you asked in the hospital if you could see me again." "I'm answering now. Yes. Every day for the rest of my life, if you'll have me." Victoria stared at him, this man with calloused hands and worn suit and eyes full of terrified hope. She thought of her penthouse apartment, her corner office, her mother's expectations, and realized none of it mattered. "I can't promise luxury or stability or anything your world values, but I can promise truth, a family that chooses you every single day." Victoria looked at this proposal for what it was. Not romance wrapped in flowers and champagne, but something harder and more honest. A man offering himself flawed and frightened, asking her to be brave enough to do the same. "Yes." Marcus blinked. "Yes. Yes. I'll marry you." but on one condition. What you let me choose you back. Not because I'm rescuing you or slumming it or whatever your fear tells you, because you're the best man I've ever known. And I refuse to let pride or class differences steal this from us." He pulled her close, kissed her forehead, and for the first time since Jennifer had returned, Marcus felt the weight on his chest begin to lift. Later. Victoria's mind was already spinning with logistics. "We'll figure out where to live, how to blend our lives, what to tell the board. Not now. Right now, let's just be two people who said yes." Snow began falling again as they stood on the courthouse steps, strangers passing without noticing that something extraordinary had happened in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. 6 months moved like water through stone, slowly reshaping everything it touched. Victoria restructured Hayes Consulting, with surgical precision carving out a non-profit division focused on community development. The board resisted until the press coverage started. Chicago Tribune ran a feature CEO who delivered Christmas. Forbes picked it up. Hayes Consulting's radical turn towards social impact. Stock price climbed 15% in 3 months. She hired Marcus to run community outreach, not because he was her fiancé, but because he'd built relationships over years that her entire company couldn't replicate. He knew which churches needed after-school programs, which shelters needed job training, which families needed what. His salary was modest but sustainable enough that he could finally quit the weekend custodial job. $45,000 a year felt like wealth after decades of scraping by. He kept the position at Lincoln Community Center, though working 3 evenings a week because Ray Patterson had become family, and some things mattered more than money. Elena remained on the board but stepped back from operations. She and Victoria met for lunch every other week, conversations still sometimes barbed but moving towards something softer. Elena showed up to events Marcus organized, wrote checks without being asked, and once, only once, told Victoria her father would have liked him. Jennifer's visits happened like clockwork. Twice monthly, Sophie would spend 3 hours with her birth mother, while Marcus and Victoria hovered nearby. They went to museums and parks and the library. Jennifer learned about Sophie's love of chapter books and hatred of Brussels sprouts and fear of dogs larger than her knee. Sophie learned that Jennifer worked in medical billing, loved terrible reality TV, and still cried every time she saw a baby. Progress wasn't linear. There were visits where Sophie refused to speak, where she asked why Jennifer had missed 7 birthdays and Christmas mornings and first days of school. There were moments when Marcus had to step in, remind both of them to breathe, reset the boundaries, but slowly, grudgingly, they were building something. The wedding took place on a Saturday in June, when Chicago had finally decided to be kind. Lincoln Community Center's activity room had been transformed. White paper lanterns strung from the ceiling, folding chairs arranged in neat rows, flowers from the farmer's market in mason jars on every surface. Ray Patterson had spent 3 days helping Marcus refinish the old floors, and they gleamed now in afternoon light. Mrs. Chen had baked enough cookies to feed the neighborhood, which was good because the neighborhood had shown up. Maria and her children. Mr. Patterson in his navy dress blues from 40 years ago. The families Marcus and Victoria had delivered presents to on that impossible Christmas Eve. Reverend Williams stood at the front, his Bible worn soft from decades of use. Sophie fidgeted in her lavender dress, the flower crown Elena had commissioned already listing to one side. Jennifer sat in the 3rd row, her hands folded in her lap. Mascara-proof makeup applied with the care of someone who expected to cry. Elena sat in the 2nd row, her spine straight, her expression carefully neutral. But Victoria had seen her mother arrive early, had watched her walk through the room touching the decorations, and caught the moment when Elena's composure cracked just slightly. Marcus waited at the front in the navy suit that had seen him through court, his father's silver cufflinks catching light. Victoria had offered to buy him something new, but he'd refused. These cufflinks belonged to a construction worker who taught his son that dignity comes from character, not credentials. "I want them with me today." When Victoria walked down the makeshift aisle, she wore a simple white dress and her father's watch. No veil, no train, just clean lines and the weight of memory on her wrist. She'd spent the morning in her old bedroom at her mother's house, Elena helping her dress in silence that felt less hostile than it used to. Your father would have walked you down this aisle if he could. Victoria had met her mother's eyes in the mirror. I know. He would have liked Marcus. Elena's voice was soft, would have recognized someone who understands what matters. Now walking toward the man she'd met by accident and chosen on purpose, Victoria felt her father's presence like a hand on her shoulder. Not approval exactly, just acknowledgement that she'd finally learned the lessons he'd spent his life trying to teach. The ceremony was brief. Reverend Williams spoke about love as choice, about families built from commitment rather than blood. He talked about second chances and the courage it takes to trust after trauma. He didn't mention class or money or the improbable nature of a CEO marrying a janitor, because in this room, those distinctions felt meaningless. Marcus spoke his vows in a voice that only trembled slightly. I promise to love you in the ordinary moments. The late-night worries and early morning coffee. The hard conversations and the comfortable silences. You saw me when I felt invisible, and I'll spend my life making sure you never feel invisible again. Victoria's vows were steadier, practiced in her head 1,000 times, but still catching in her throat. I promise to choose you every day, when it's easy and when it's hard. When my board questions us, or my mother doubts us, or the world says we don't fit. You taught me what really matters, and I promise never to forget. You're enough exactly as you are. You always have been. They kissed and the room erupted. Not polite applause, but genuine celebration. Whoops and whistles and Sophie's 7-year-old shriek of joy. The reception was potluck chaos. Maria had brought tamales. Mr. Patterson's famous apple pie sat beside Mrs. Chen's cookies. Someone had strung lights in the courtyard outside, and kids ran between tables while adults clustered in groups telling stories, building community. Victoria found herself dancing with Marcus to music from Ray's phone, Sophie between them demanding to be included. They spun in circles, all three of them laughing, and Victoria looked over her daughter. She could think that now her daughter and saw Jennifer watching from the edge of the courtyard. The expression on Jennifer's face was complicated. Happiness for Sophie, certainly, but also grief for everything she'd missed, everything she couldn't reclaim. Victoria caught her eye, gestured for her to join. Jennifer shook her head, content to watch from a distance. Later, when the party had thinned and Sophie was helping Mrs. Chen collect paper plates, Elena approached. She'd removed her suit jacket concession to the June warmth and held a glass of wine someone had pressed into her hand. You look happy. Victoria stopped mid-conversation with Ray. I am. Your father would have wanted this for you. Elena's voice carried something that might have been apology. Would have wanted you to have what he and I lost. What's that balance? Work that matters but doesn't consume you. Someone who sees you clearly. Elena took a careful sip of wine. I spent 30 years building a company and forgot to build a marriage. When your father died, all I had left was spreadsheets and blame. You still have me. Elena's eyes filled and she blinked hard. I know, I'm trying to remember that. They stood together in silence, not quite comfortable but not hostile either. Progress measured in millimeters. As sunset painted the courtyard in gold, Marcus pulled Victoria aside. He handed her a small box, edges worn smooth. I got you something. Well, not got. This was my grandmother's. Inside lay a simple gold ring with 3 small stones. Victoria recognized it as working-class jewelry, the kind bought on payment plans and worn for 50 years. She worked in a garment factory her whole life, raised 5 kids on that salary. I wanted you to have something that represents where I come from. Victoria slid it onto her finger beside the diamond Elena had insisted on buying. The fit was imperfect. The ring had belonged to a woman with larger hands, but the meaning settled perfectly. It's beautiful. You sure I know it's not what you're used to? She pressed a finger to his lips. I don't want what I'm used to. I want this. You. Our life. Even the messy parts. Especially the messy parts. They stood in the fading light, surrounded by the evidence of celebration, half-eaten cake and wilting flowers and the sound of children laughing. Victoria thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago, sitting alone in a restaurant on Christmas Eve, so hollow she couldn't feel joy or taste wine or remember why success had seemed important. She thought about her father, about the lessons encoded in his calloused hands and steady presence, about how it had taken a stranger in a worn coat to teach her what her father had known all along. Work was just work. Who you were when you weren't working, that was everything. Sophie appeared at their side, flower crown completely askew, now face flushed from running. "Can I tell you a secret?" "Always." Marcus knelt to her level. "I knew she was the right one." Sophie looked at Victoria seriously. "That's why I made you the card about not being lonely. I prayed for Santa to send Daddy someone nice. And then you came. So really you should write Santa a thank you note." Marcus pulled his daughter into his arms. "Best Christmas present I ever got." They walked home as night fell, three people who'd found each other through accident and choice. Behind them, volunteers broke down chairs and swept floors. Ahead, the city stretched out under stars, just beginning to show. The house in the in-between neighborhood, purchased with Victoria's savings and Marcus's sweat equity, wouldn't be ready for another month. They found Jennifer waiting on the stoop when they arrived at Marcus's apartment. She stood quickly when she saw them, nervous. "I know I wasn't invited to stay, but I wanted to give you this." She handed them a wrapped box. Sophie tore into it with 7-year-old enthusiasm, revealing a photo album. Inside were pictures Jennifer had kept. Sophie as an infant, Marcus young and hopeful, moments from a life that had fractured but not entirely disappeared. "I thought Sophie should have these." Jennifer's voice shook. "So she knows she was loved from the beginning, even when I was too sick to show it properly." Sophie flipped through pages, seeing herself as a baby in hospital blankets, in Marcus's arms on courthouse steps after the adoption finalized, in a dozen ordinary moments that Jennifer had recorded before everything fell apart. "Thank you." Marcus's voice was thick. Thank you." Jennifer nodded, turned to leave. Sophie's voice stopped her. "Wait. You can come up if you want. Mrs. Chen made extra cookies." Jennifer looked at Marcus, seeking permission. He hesitated, years of protection warring with new understanding, then nodded. For a little while, they climbed stairs together. Marcus and Victoria, Sophie and Jennifer. This improbable family held together by forgiveness and daily choice. The apartment smelled like coffee and sugar cookies and the jasmine Victoria had bought that morning because it reminded her of hope. Sophie showed Jennifer her room, her drawings, her collection of library cards from Saturday trips with her father. Jennifer listened with the intensity of someone memorizing every detail against future absence. Marcus watched his daughter bloom under dual maternal attention, his wife's hand steady in his, and felt something he'd spent 6 years avoiding. Not the desperate hope of survival, but the quiet certainty that tomorrow would be worth showing up for. Victoria checked email, one-handed board questions, hiring approvals, the endless machinery of business that used to consume her. But she worked with half attention, grounded in this kitchen, in ways her corner office had never managed. As evening deepened, Jennifer prepared to leave. Sophie hugged her carefully, progress measured in increments. "Will you come to my school play next month?" Jennifer looked at Marcus, who nodded permission. "I'd be honored." After Jennifer left, after Sophie was bathed and reading in bed, Marcus and Victoria stood at their small window watching the city breathe. "We did it." "Did what?" "Built something real." Victoria leaned into him. "Out of accidents and mistakes and people brave enough to try." Marcus kissed her hair. "You know what the best part is? What we get to keep building. Tomorrow and next week and next year. Every day choosing each other until we're too old to remember how this started. I'll always remember." Victoria turned to face him. Christmas Eve. The wrong table, the right man. Best choice you ever made. Not choice. Victoria's voice was firm. Choices. Plural. I chose to stay when I figured out you weren't Derek. Chose to help with the presents. Chose to show up for Sophie's visit with Jennifer. Chose to marry you. She pulled him closer. And I'll choose you again tomorrow. And every day after that. The city settled into night outside traffic sounds and distant sirens, and the ordinary music of life continuing. Inside apartment 3B, two people who'd found each other through impossible odds stood together, understanding that love wasn't about finding someone perfect. It was about finding someone worth choosing again and again through custody battles and board meetings and all the ordinary disasters that made up a life. In her room, Sophie fell asleep holding the photo album images of herself as a baby pressed against her chest. She dreamed of families that broke and mended, of mothers who left and came back, of fathers who worked 2 jobs and still had energy for bedtime stories. She dreamed of a woman in an expensive coat who sat at the wrong table and stayed anyway. And in the morning, they would all wake up and try again. This family built from choice and forgiveness and the stubborn belief that second chances were worth the risk. The choice to try, the choice to trust, the choice to love. 6 months became a year, then 2. The seasons turned over Chicago snow, giving way to green, giving way to gold, giving way to white again. The house in the in-between neighborhood filled with Sophie's laughter and Marcus's tools and Victoria's late-night phone calls that now ended at reasonable hours. Jennifer's visits became sleepovers, became weekends, the boundaries expanding as trust rebuilt itself, brick by cautious brick. Elena showed up one Sunday with paint samples and stayed for dinner, her sharp edges softening around Sophie's questions about what Grandpa had been like when he was young. The nonprofit division grew beyond anyone's projections. 47 jobs became 200, 3 after-school programs became 15. Marcus stopped feeling like an imposter in board meetings about the same time Victoria stopped apologizing for leaving work early to watch Sophie's soccer games. On a cold December evening, almost 2 years after the wrong table, they stood in Lincoln Community Center's parking lot. The same place Marcus had first confronted Jennifer, the same place he'd later proposed expanding the youth programs that would change everything. Ray Patterson was retiring and half the neighborhood had shown up to say goodbye. Sophie ran past with a gaggle of kids, her jacket unzipped despite the cold, Jennifer calling after her to be careful. Marcus watched his daughter ignore both mothers with the selective hearing of an 8-year-old and felt Victoria's hand slip into his. You know what I realized? Victoria's breath misted in the December air. What's that? That night at Giovanni's, I was sitting at the wrong table. But I was also at exactly the right restaurant on exactly the right night in exactly the right city. She turned to face him. 1 table over and we never meet. 1 hour earlier and you're still mopping floors. 1 day later and I'm in Singapore closing a deal. Marcus pulled her closer. So what you're saying is, I'm saying there's no such thing as the wrong table. Just the courage to stay when you could leave. Sophie circled back, breathless and grinning. Daddy, Jennifer says we can get hot chocolate. Can we? Please. What do you think? Marcus looked at Victoria. I think Team Sophie wins again. The little girl whooped and ran off to collect Jennifer, and Marcus watched them go, this improbable constellation of people who'd become his universe. Not by blood or design or any logical pattern, but by the 1,000 small decisions that added up to family. You never answered my question. Victoria tucked herself under his arm. That night in the hospital, when you asked if this was real, I didn't think I needed to. Marcus kissed the top of her head. We're standing here, aren't we? The city lights flickered on as dusk settled, and somewhere across town Giovanni's restaurant was filling with couples on first dates and anniversary dinners and all the ordinary ways people tried to find each other. Most would fail. Some would succeed. A lucky few would sit at the wrong table and discover it was right all along. Marcus and Victoria walked toward the warm spill of light from the community center, toward Sophie's laughter and Jennifer's careful joy and Ray's retirement cake and all the messy, complicated beauty of a life built from broken pieces made whole. Behind them, fresh snow began to fall, covering their footprints, erasing the path they'd taken. It didn't matter. They knew the way home now, had known it since the moment two strangers chose honesty over pretense, service over self-interest, and each other over the safer distance of staying alone. The choice to try, the choice to trust, the choice to love, again and again and again.